Night is falling on a coast the traveler does not know. He has walked since morning. There is no inn, no roadside fire, no one who owes him anything. So he does the only thing his world allows. He chooses a door and he knocks. What happens next is not up to the man inside. It is governed by a law with no courts and no police. A law enforced by the king of the gods himself. The Greeks called that law Xenia. The Odyssey is built on it. The poem's first 4 books are designed to show it in every mode at once, kept faithfully and trampled underfoot. And those same 4 books carry a second story. A young man, paralyzed in his father's failing house, being pushed by a goddess into adulthood. This is the law of the stranger, and the making of Telemachus. Start with the word, because English cannot carry it. Translators usually settle for the guest-host relationship, and the sheer awkwardness of that phrase is a confession. English has neither an equivalent word nor an equivalent concept. Hospitality is sometimes offered instead, and the hospitality is far too weak. It carries none of the divine sanction, none of the absolute responsibility and obligation. Modern hospitality is something a person chooses to extend. Xenia is a duty. It is also a relationship, a standing bond, in the Odyssey and the Iliad alike, between 2 people called xenoi. The singular is xenos, and that one word can be translated, depending on context, as guest, host, stranger, foreigner, or friend. 5 ideas that seem entirely distinct to modern thinking, folded into a single word, because xenos names a particular kind of formal friendship. Not affection, not fondness, but the bond 2 men enter once they have stood as guest and host to one another. Picture it from the guest side. In this world, a traveler is away from his own community when night falls. With rare exceptions, a goddess in disguise. The participants are always male. There are no hotels. He needs shelter, a meal, a bath, a change of clothing, and there is exactly one way to get them. He presents himself at a door that matches his own standing. A poor man, a beggar, goes to the hut of another poor man. A king's son goes to the palace of whatever town he has reached. He knocks and he asks to be taken in for the night. That single word does all the work. He is a xenos in the sense of guest because the householder will take him in. He is a xenos in the sense of foreigner, and foreigners is defined very narrowly here. A man from another town qualifies. That is the sense that survives in the English word xenophobia, the fear of foreigners. He is a stranger because the householder has never laid eyes on him. And once he has been fed, sheltered, and allowed to sleep, he becomes a friend, in the stylized sense. A bond now exists between the 2 men. It persists and it is inherited. Should their children ever meet, they will owe obligations to one another. The householder, for his part, is a xenos in the sense of host, and the relationship between one xenos and another, that is xenia. An arrangement like this works only if both sides are powerfully motivated never to abuse it. The guest must not rob his host or murder him or mistreat him in any way. The host owes the guest the same. A society run on this system needs a deep sense of obligation and severe sanctions for violation. In the world of the 2 epics, that enforcement is divine. Xenia is validated, protected, and overseen by Zeus himself, who carries the title Zeus, Zeus, god of Xenia. A guest who wrongs his host, a host who wrongs his guest or turns him from the door, has offended Zeus directly, and he will suffer for it. That is why the Trojan War carries the weight it does. When Paris abducted Helen, he was, among everything else, violating Xenia. He had come to stay in the house of Helen and Menelaus. He was Menelaus's xenos, and he ran off with his host's wife. It is hard to imagine a worse breach. Running away with the wife of one's host is precisely what a guest must never do. The Trojan War is fought, in one of its aspects, over a violation of Xenia. The Odyssey raises those stakes and makes them personal. Odysseus is a man far from home, dependent at every landfall on how strangers receive him. his homecoming, his family, his kingdom. All of it will be helped or hindered by the quality of Xenia he meets on his travels. It is one of the poem's central themes. And the poem spends its first 4 books building the framework. Those 4 books belong to someone else. Their most important character, without question, is Odysseus' son, and scholars call them the Telemachus, a name that stresses just how central he is. If the Odyssey is a poem about Odysseus, the Telemachus is a poem about Telemachus. Across these books, he experiences Xenia from nearly every possible angle, so that the poem can paint the whole institution, how it ought to work and how it ought not to. In books 1 and 2, he stands on the host's side at home on Ithaca. In books 3 and 4, he travels to his father's old comrades in arms, Nestor and Menelaus, and stands on the guest's side, received exactly as hosts should receive a guest. Xenia also explains the suitors, the young nobles courting Telemachus' mother Penelope and taking over his household. The poem frames their wrongdoing almost entirely as a violation of Xenia. When Telemachus denounces them before an assembly of the men of Ithaca, his charge is not merely that they court Penelope against her wishes, it is that they occupy his house, slaughter and eat his flocks, and drink his wine, wasting away his substance, destroying his possessions. There is one more thing Xenia strictly demands: reciprocity. A guest who can give his host a gift should give one. A guest who cannot should at least leave before he wears out his welcome. What he must never do is stay for years, eating his host's food and wearing his host's clothes. Usually the balance is not settled between one pair of men at all. It works itself out across the whole society. The man who is a guest this year will be a host next year, perhaps to someone else entirely, and the exchange evens out over time. A host feels the obligation because he remembers the nights when he was the guest. The suitors ignore all of it. They give nothing in return, and that is precisely how Telemachus frames their offense in the assembly. They eat his animals, they drink his wine, and they give nothing back. The poem introduces him accordingly. The very first view of Telemachus shows him receiving a xenos, Athena disguised as a human man, a visiting sea lord named Mentes. He believes he is hosting a mortal stranger. He has no idea his visitor is a goddess. The first thing he does is greet his guest, the first of the Odyssey's many host greets guest scenes. He goes to the door, takes her by the hand, and bids her welcome, calling her Xenos. And here is the translation problem again. Welcome, friend, welcome, guest, welcome, stranger, welcome, foreigner. English forces a choice. The Greek word means all of them at once. Then he takes her spear. From the guest's point of view, the host is relieving a tired visitor of his burden. From the host's point of view, it is excellent sense. If a stranger walks in armed, you politely set the weapon aside until it is clear he recognizes the protocols of Xenia and will abide by them. Telemachus brings his guest inside and offers food, a bath, and a bed for the night. And here comes the element the whole institution turns on. Only after the guest's immediate physical needs have been met, most urgently a meal, may the host ask who he is. Asking too early counts as a violation, so Telemachus waits until Athena has eaten before he asks her identity. The reason cuts to the heart of Xenia. The duty must not depend on whether the host likes the guest, knows the guest, or has any feelings about him at all. The principle is brutally simple. This person is here and he needs help, so the host must help him. A host who opens with the question, "Who are you?" implies that he might refuse if he dislikes the answer. If, say, the stranger at his table turns out to be the grandson of an old enemy. So among the protocols of Xenia, protocols, not rules, for none of this was ever set down in a rule book. The question of identity comes only after the guest's most pressing needs have been attended to. Telemachus, in other words, is introduced as a young man who knows exactly how to act as a proper host. And during and after the meal, as he opens his heart to his guest, his two troubles surface: grief for a father 20 years gone, and anger at what the suitors are doing to his house. Athena has come for precisely this. The audience already knows it from the opening of Book 1. While Zeus was agreeing to send Hermes to tell the nymph Calypso to release Odysseus, Athena announced that she would go down to Ithaca to put some heart into the young man, to stir him up, to give him the final push into maturity. He needs the push. Telemachus has never asserted himself, and many readers find him strikingly immature for a young man who must be about 20 by now. He behaves much younger. Athena's aim is not only that he discover his father is alive, he will learn that from Menelaus. It is that he finally step into adulthood and take action. She urges two courses of action. First, call a council of all the men of Ithaca, and denounce the suitors openly, publicly, for destroying his substance and for their violations of Xenia. Second, travel to Nestor and to Menelaus in search of news of his father. Notice what she is not saying. Athena knows perfectly well that Odysseus will be home within days. She has just arranged for Hermes to be sent to Calypso. She could reveal herself and simply tell him. She does not. She wants Telemachus to do it himself, to go out on his own, to be tested away from home, and to have earned his manhood before his father actually returns. Telemachus takes his guest's advice. In the council of Book 2, he stands up and lays the charge exactly as she urged him to, and what he describes is unmistakably a violation of Xenia, though tellingly neither he nor Athena ever uses the word for it. And at that moment, Zeus answers. Two eagles sweep over the assembly and tear at one another with their talons. In both epics, birds passing overhead are messages legible to the specially trained or the specially gifted, and one man in the crowd can read them: Halicerces, prophet, seer, reader of omens. Halicerces reads the sign. Odysseus, he says, will soon be home. And there will be terrible repercussions for the suitors if they do not change their behavior before he arrives. The suitors' answer comes from their spokesman, Eurymachus, and it drips contempt. He tells the old man to go home and prophesy to his own children before some evil finds them. He can read omens far better himself. Plenty of birds wander under the sun's rays, and not all of them mean anything. Odysseus is dead far away, and he wishes Halicerces had died with him, sparing them all his predictions, and his stirring up of an already angry Telemachus. He is not finished. If the old man keeps this up, he warns, a penalty will be laid on him that he will bitterly regret. Telemachus must send his mother to choose a husband and marry at once, for the suitors will not leave until she does. They fear no one, certainly not Telemachus, for all his eloquence, and no prophecy the old man utters will come to pass. And meanwhile, the young man's possessions will go on being devoured. No compensation ever, for as long as Penelope puts them off. Stop and count what that one speech tramples. Eurymachus insults an old man in a society where age is genuinely honored. He insults a prophet, and through the prophet, the god that prophet serves, Zeus. He declares Odysseus dead and is openly glad of it, which is contempt for his rightful king. And if Odysseus is dead, then his rightful king is Telemachus, of whom he says nothing good whatever. He announces that prophecies are of no concern, which amounts to saying that the gods are of no concern. He promises to force Penelope into marriage, whether she wishes it or not. Age, prophecy, the gods, the king, the rights of the king, and the rights of the king's son. Eurymachus spits on every one of them in a single speech. That matters for every suitor, not just the man speaking. Before the poem ends, Odysseus will kill them all, to 108 of them, and the poem appears to want its audience to approve, though not every scholar agrees. But the design is visible. The suitors are presented as so far beyond the pale of decent society, so thoroughly outside its mores that nothing remains but to deal with them harshly. One more detail sharpens the contrast and makes the suitors a mirror of Telemachus himself. Most of them are, like him, sons of absent fathers. When Odysseus sailed for Troy, he did not sail alone. He took every man of Ithaca of fighting age with him. A few suitors still have fathers on the island, men too old to sail 20 years ago, very old indeed now, but most of their fathers left with the king. So the disorder on Ithaca can be read as a portrait of what happens to a community when the fathers are gone. Two extremes of the fatherless son, drawn with almost frightening realism. On one side, a young man so immature he cannot assert himself until a goddess prompts him. On the other, young men completely out of control, utterly reckless, dismissive of every norm that society holds. The disorder runs deeper than a failure of Xenia, but it is the failure of Xenia inside Odysseus' own household that represents it and makes it visible. Books 3 and 4 turn the institution the right way up, with Telemachus now the guest. In Book 3, he sails to Pylos, to Nestor, the oldest and wisest of the Greeks. Athena guides him there in a new disguise, a human being named Mentor, an old friend of Odysseus. That name has entered English as the word for an older person who guides a younger one. Nestor receives the young man exactly as a good host should, a meal, a bath, a bed, and no question about his identity until after he has eaten. Every element of proper Xenia is present, then Nestor sends him onward. Menelaus at Sparta has only recently returned from wanderings of his own and may have heard something of Odysseus. He supplies horses and a chariot for the journey, and his own son, Pisistratus, as a traveling companion. In Book 4, the two young men arrive at Sparta, where Menelaus and Helen greet and entertain them properly in their turn. A feast, baths, beds. And here appears one more element of Xenia, guest gifts, presents provided for a departing visitor. Telemachus is not actually shown leaving Sparta in Book 4. He will not leave until Book 15. But Menelaus speaks of the splendid gifts he will give when the time comes. These visits do more than model good hosting. They hand Telemachus and the audience crucial background. At the young man's request, Nestor recounts what happened after the fall of Troy, the homecomings of several of the Greeks, though of Odysseus' fate he knows nothing, and above all he tells the story of Agamemnon, murdered on his return from Troy by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. That story will not leave the poem alone. The homecoming that ends in murder, the treacherous wife, the new man in the house, returns again and again through the Odyssey as the alternative version of what could happen to Odysseus if Penelope were unfaithful. People keep talking about Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. In Book 11, the ghost of Agamemnon himself will appear, and Nestor leans hard on one part of the tale. Orestes, Agamemnon's son, who avenged his father's murder. His message to Telemachus is unmistakable. Go and do likewise. Be rid of the suitors. Defend your father's honor. It is a demanding paradigm. 108 suitors is rather a lot to expect one young man to dispose of alone, but Nestor clearly offers it as a model to follow. At Sparta, the conversation turns to Troy. Helen takes one look at Telemachus and knows him. He resembles Odysseus so closely, she says, that he must be his son. And the grief comes flooding in. Telemachus weeping for his lost father, Menelaus for all the men the war took, Pisistratus for an elder brother who died there. Helen's response is one of the strangest moments in the poem. She drugs the three men with an Egyptian drug called nepenthe, meaning no pain, no grief, so that their grieving will stop. The drug is described as so powerful that a man under its influence could watch his own family slaughtered in front of his face that very day and feel no grief at all. While the men are drugged, Helen tells a story meant to prove Odysseus's cleverness. Once she says he entered Troy in disguise, and she recognized him and helped him. Menelaus counters with a story of his own. When the Greeks crouched hidden inside the Trojan horse, Helen walked around it, imitating the voices of their wives, luring them to cry out. Odysseus alone understood what was happening, and kept every man silent. Menelaus's reply amounts to a barbed kind of agreement. Odysseus was indeed a very clever man, clever enough to stop Helen from getting them all killed. The episode is extremely problematic, and it has generated a great deal of scholarship. At the least, it shows that Helen remains as ambiguous in the Odyssey as she was in the Iliad. Did she want to be at Troy or not? Her own story implies that she did not. Her husband's implies that she did. Then comes the news Telemachus actually came for. Menelaus recounts a conversation from his wanderings in Egypt with a minor sea god named Proteus. Proteus told him of Agamemnon's death. He told him how Ajax the Lesser drowned at sea, hated by Athena for his sacrilege at Troy. And he told him one thing more. Odysseus is being held captive on an island by the nymph Calypso. Telemachus can do the reckoning. Menelaus spoke with Proteus only a couple of years ago, so his father was alive that recently. The news is not entirely good. A man imprisoned by a goddess is still a prisoner, but it gives him reason to hope that his father will in fact return. And he has now had what Athena wanted for him, the chance to assert himself as an adult in his own right before that return. The Telemachy closes with a brief look back at Ithaca at the end of Book 4. The Suitors have reached a conclusion of their own. Now that Telemachus is behaving like an adult, now that he has taken some authority, the only way to deal with him is to kill him. They arrange an ambush for his journey home, and Penelope weeps for Odysseus once more. With that, the situation on Ithaca is fixed firmly enough in the audience's mind that the poet can put it on hold. Telemachus will not reappear until Book 15, Penelope not until Book 16. The bard has established how desperately Odysseus is needed. He has set the scene, a household devoured, killers lying in wait for the son. Now at last, he can turn to Odysseus himself. From the first knock at the door to the ambush laid in the dark, the Telemachy makes one continuous argument. The bond between guest and host is the measure by which this poem judges everyone inside it. Telemachus has honored it. The suitors have spat on it. And the boy who could not assert himself has become a young man worth murdering, a young man who finally knows what the audience has known from the beginning. His father is alive.